Egg here talking as well. He's going to be asking.
Works with data in Gun, different options, and how you might be wise to set up something that maybe has the typical accounts and then users within an account, and even to the point of could you set up things like read access, write access. I guess I'm coming from a point of having looked at Firebase primarily, so I'm looking to do those types of security rules if I can.
So first question to just help set the stage, because security winds up being different depending upon the environment you're working in. I'm assuming you're trying to build a centralized service, something like Facebook or Google or whatnot. You're not trying to build like
right
or something like that. Okay.
Yeah, like what the plan, the stack that I'm really looking at is Electron, Gun, and probably just a node server to S3.
Perfect.
Initially. So
the nice thing is if you're running a centralized app, security really isn't that much different between all the database vendors, whether it's MySQL or MongoDB or whatnot. You essentially only perform writes on a server that you trust that can do authorization against some peer that wants to write data. Now, Firebase had this problem where they're fully, the back end for you. So how do you have an authorized server? Because you can't have the client code be doing the security. Well, you can in a decentralized setting, but it requires significantly different logic. So Firebase kind of invented this JSON format for specifying security rules. And I'm personally not a huge fan of it because that means my security logic is stringified in JSON strings, which just seems a little uncomfortable to me. We need to get the door for people. Sure. Gotcha. The pizza has come. Too bad you can't eat the pizza.
Yeah. Too bad they don't do smell over the internet.
Yeah. So most people, though, kind of looking around, or how they found Gun was probably because they were searching for Firebase. So right now, Gun doesn't have any of that security JSON. You just pass it like an option or a configuration.
Right.
But nothing stops you from running a Gun node server, as you mentioned, and just doing security there. And rather than it being, you're doing your security checks in JSON strings, you're actually doing it in JavaScript.
Right, which I prefer personally. Yeah. So
we have two options. We can either talk about stuff theoretically, or we could try, and this could be disastrous, to pull up code editors and
well, I guess a quick overview of the approach you'd take would be good, but even if it's not a working application, even just some JavaScript code and what you might do.
So the example app that I have is a fully peer-to-peer example app, which is not the type of logic you're going to want to do on the server. Right. So just quick background, have you done any like node servers with Mongo or MySQL?
Yeah, to a point. Node is a newer stack to me, so it's all stuff that I'm learning and researching at this point. Like I worked for a very niche product that's a little off the wall as far as they didn't really stick to standards, is the way I'd put it. It's called Wakanda, but it was odd. So I don't have a really classic understanding of what most people would know.
Are they by chance? I'm looking them up really quickly. No, they're not. They're a golf.
Say that again.
Is Wakanda a golf club?
No, it's WAKANDA.io. Wakanda.
Are they also a database?
Yeah, they're a company called 4D, which is an old Mac database. And then they try to put a JavaScript stack together, and
yeah, somebody mentioned. Actually, was it you that mentioned it the other day? I was actually fairly impressed with how they had set themselves up. I think, if I haven't confused them with other
people. Like on the surface, it looks interesting, but it's when you pull the covers back.
Oh.
They did it their own way, and that's fine sometimes, but I think you're further ahead if you stick to what people expect.
Gun is pretty unconventional when it comes to databases as well.
Yeah, but you've stuck to you line up very well with Firebase, which has had a huge impact, and so it's not like you're walking in totally foreign.
Right.
So I guess I would start from the beginning, is what I would say.
So before I rewind to that, with probably the side projects that you just like seed projects that you cloned for Node. I know you haven't done a ton of Node stuff. Were you using Passport? Were you using a particular library?
Yeah, I looked at Passport, and that's primarily what I've looked at.
So to start with security, you probably have to decide what your base level is, right? Are you going to be using token authentication?
Yeah.
If you're going to be using token authentication, are you using cookies, or are you using what is it called? JSON. What is the name? You guys remember JSON web tokens?
Yeah.
So you would prefer a JSON web token approach than
if I could, yeah.
Okay. Just to keep things stateless.
Yep.
Okay. I haven't had, because most of the security and authentication stuff I did was probably like 2 years ago. The other open source project I have is kind of it's called Coalesce, and it's kind of a modularized version of Express.
Yeah.
WebSockets and HTTP, and will deploy routes for you. So I liked it because I didn't like with Express, if I wanted to add a route, I had to touch my web server code. And whenever I touch my web server code, I'm afraid that I'm going to break something and crash. So I wanted something where I could write a standalone file that I then just upload to the server, and it then automatically gets deployed and run when requested.
Right.
So when I was doing that, I was using a cookie-based approach because and this has irritated some of those guys, I like compatibility kind of the most. I try and fight for ubiquity of baseline. It just works. Progressive enhancement. So start with like cookies, and then I will then upgrade if I ever get time to do that, and I never got time to do that.
Right.
So I don't have much experience on the JSON web token.
Okay, well, let me start with this type of question. So say I've got two Electron applications being used by two different people, and I've got a node server with Gun running on it. I would have Gun running on each client as well, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when I do a put or whatever it is in Gun, how do I hook into that prior to it writing on the server and basically strangle the access at that point? That pizza looks good, by the way.
It's good. All right. No, it's horrible. Horrible. You don't want any.
The piece ripped off a little bit too large. Let me grab some water really quickly.
Sure.
Well,
I have water, so I can join in that way.
awesome.
So are most of the guys in the room working on the project then?
Yeah, these are all my employees.
Okay.
And then we have a new member, which is my wife.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And my son is hiding out in the corner.
Oh, cool.
And then, yeah, like I said, well, we only announced this meetup like three days ago. So
Yeah.
we probably need to just.
You could probably work on your organizational and promotional skills, but
We are all technical and artist people. So
I gathered that from Gitter.
okay.
If you notice, one of my first comments when you said you had funding, I was like, really? you might want to get someone on board to start talking.
I am trying, and so if you or if you know people, please talk to me because yes, I need that help.
Yeah.
Okay, Okay, so remind me what the question was.
So the question was, if we've got two peers,
Yeah, okay.
people using the application, how do you tap into that on the server? And because my understanding is every local client will hold a cache of the full data or whatever they've subscribed to. And then the node server would have obviously everything that gets pushed up to S3 or whatever you choose as your persistence.
Yes, so let me see if I can, am I able to screencast?
Yeah, what you do is you go up to the top right or top left. There will be a menu or there will be icons. I don't know what version of Hangouts you'll be on. They went to a beta recently. And then there's a green arrow on a screen that says screen share.
Oh, looks like going left.
Oh, there we
Or
go.
if you're top right, there's 3 dots and there's a
Entire screen. Thank you. You're good with this stuff.
yeah, I do Hangouts all the time, so
Can use.
there I am.
Okay, wonderful. I'm gonna jump. My battery is probably pretty good because everybody else is crowding over my screen. 2 hours remaining. That'll be fine. So, and let's see if I can. Whoa, that's Zoom. I'm new to using a Mac, and it's weird, so I'm not quite.
You're increasing the. Okay, yeah, there you go.
I actually.
No, that's good.
So, first thing first is when we initialize gun, we call the gun constructor.
Right.
Depending upon what environment you're in, you can pass. Well, sorry, you can pass an options argument in no matter what environment you're in, but the options are going to be different for environments. So I'm going to actually erase that and focus on just this. And these options are less documented because they have more to do with like module and extension developers than necessarily regular people who are like using.
Yeah.
There's this nifty, and I need to differentiate. We're about to release 0.3 is available in the dev branch. I keep on switching to looking at you, thinking now I have camera access, but I don't. So
No.
switching back and forth. It seems more human, at least in face. There's quite a few breaking changes between 0.2, which is currently in master, and 0.3, which is currently in dev.
Yeah.
And we're going to be moving it over to master fairly soon. All the tests we're passing, but we're just checking some performance stuff, and I have to make some other edits before pushing it up. So
Actually, most of the breaking changes are happening under the hood rather than
yes, correct. But if we're wanting to tap into the read and write stuff, it's basically using the wire.
Mm-hmm.
So because Gun is entirely modular, so this format that I'm showing you is the 0.3, aka
Okay.
moving forward.
Yep.
As Gun is entirely modular, that one's mine actually.
No, it is.
Oh. Oh, sorry. And I got an email. Let me make sure that that's not somebody else trying to join in. Nope, it's not. Okay. So because everything in Gun is modular, well, okay, maybe I should back up a step. So Gun's primary focus is an in-memory data synchronization engine that does the content solution for you.
Yep.
Now, that by itself isn't very useful if the data doesn't actually get saved and stuff like that. So Gun does persist, and there's a couple default modules that we have, like local storage in the browser, and don't use file.js, which is the default on the server, but Jesse has, I'm pointing the camera at Jesse, but you can't see.
No.
Gun level is pretty good because it's using level as a
Yeah, no, I read that. I read up on that, and that does look very interesting.
Oh, there's another point to put out there is that Level has a lot of backend modules, and so you could persist with things like Mongo or Redis.
Yeah.
I do not recommend it, but you could do it. So,
but Level on its own would be sufficient, from what I gather. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, personally, I don't think you should be using any of them except for S3.
Right.
If you're running in Google, using Google Cloud Storage, or if you're running on Azure, because half the reason why I built Gun is because I thought it was really dumb that people when they're in the cloud, will spin up a machine, put MongoDB on that machine, which is attached to a hard drive that you have to pre-allocate to start. And people will pre-allocate, like a terabyte drive for Mongo or something like that. And the funny thing is, even though you have a terabyte drive that's attached to this one instance, you can't attach it to multiple instances, multiple Amazon EC2 instances. It can only be attached to one, okay? And even though it's attached, you're paying for the total space usage rather than the individual usage. And
yeah, no, S3 seemed like an interesting idea to say the least. And my only question there was if you get into concurrency, like if you've got 1,000 people writing against it at the same time, I guess Gun takes care of that concurrency thing and then just dumps it up to S3 every once in a while.
Yes.
Okay.
So the reason why I'm saying it's not wise to use MongoDB as a backend with the Gun level is because then there's the temptation to access Mongo outside of Gun. And if you access Mongo outside of Gun, then you're not resolving it through Gun's concurrency control, the conflict resolution algorithm. So then that means you're going to potentially get diverging data because Gun has to be the gatekeeper for that data in order to preserve the resolution. So, so absolutely, I'm glad you understand that. So many people don't. The other aspect is then you're paying for CPU time on the Amazon instance, and you're paying for the total allocated disk space on the storage block, and that storage block is constrained to that one CPU. And that's kind of ridiculous because that's really, really expensive to be paying for all that stuff up front when most of the time it's idle. And that's something like using an actual file system or S3 eliminates all that pain because you don't have to run a Gun server. You only need to run the Gun server when you're wanting to actually access the data. So the demos we have of like Gun running on Heroku shuts down the app every 15 minutes. Well, but things still work because once the data is at rest, it can be at rest. You don't need a database server. But then when you're wanting to interact with the database, well, you need an application server, and that is going to be available anyways. Okay, so Gun's very modular in its design. And as a result, you can then tap into that. So this is how Jesse wrote his Gun level driver, or this is how I wrote the S3 driver or the local storage driver. You can pass an option into Gun where you say the wire is an object, and it just takes two commands: git and put. And underneath the hood, like that's all Gun is doing. Now, I do need to note, because I don't think I mentioned this earlier, is that while Gun core is focused on in-memory operation, it never assumes that the data is already in memory. It assumes that it might have to pull the data from some node that's currently offline or something like that. So these take, well, before we can get data, we have to put data. And this is kind of where you can tap into.
Okay, so this is like a route handler, so for something similar. Like whenever anyone puts data into the database, it's going to run through this function. I can do all my whatever I want, any kind of authorization or rules or any of this type of thing at that point.
Correct, but there's a few nuances. The structure here is when the server receives the update and then puts it to disk at rest, which means that if you were to do your security in these two functions, the security rules would really only apply putting it to disk, but not preventing the in-memory operation. And as a result of the in-memory operation, the server also then relays that message to all their peers.
Right.
So I wanted to explain that there's these hooks, but realistically, okay. So not only is there these hooks for the disk to persist things, and which allows you to attach to whatever whatever storage engine you want, whether it's as simple as a file system or not. The exact same process is also used for the wire or the transport protocol. So whether that be HTTP or whether that be WebSockets, or whether that be JSON key. The importance here is the isomorphism of going over the wire and going to disk. One of Gun's strong points is that the data is designed. Oh, we have somebody who's joined the video. Would you like to say hi? We may not be able to hear you, actually.
I think that's possibly the penguin guy, and he might be on a phone.
Ah, that makes sense. Let me jump over the chat room and see. He didn't. Okay, he hasn't said anything. All right. Okay, so one of the important part of how Gun handles concurrency is it treats the disk and the wire as being the same. The network and the disk is essentially being the same. They're both very vulnerable to failures, and they have the same structure. So if you want to, sorry that we're going like pretty detailed into all these edge case nuances.
No, it's good.
It's the same way if you want to write an extension, sorry, a module that plugs into Level or plugs into S3. If you are also wanting to write an extension that uses, let's say, WebRTC or HTTP or WebSockets, you'd be using these same callbacks. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the important, so they're distinct in their behavior in terms of how you then, as the driver, the person who writes the driver, uses them. So if I'm writing the WebSocket one, I'm essentially treating WebSocket as a storage engine because I'm sending data to that wire in the same way I might send data to Level.
Okay.
The important part, though, is on this. Well, so what I'm saying is they're the same, but how we use them is going to be slightly different. So on the server, what you'd want to do is actually tap into the incoming stream of data. Because I can hear now. I'm home. My Gmail never got the invite. Okay. Do you have a mic? So what I was trying to clarify earlier is that this get and put, for the most part, is going to be treated at the disk layer, and that's already too late for security.
Right.
We want to assume or treat it as if it is the point at which we are.
Like at some point, one of the nodes needs to be the boss of who's allowed to do what, and maybe holds a more complete set of the data, right? So that's my question is, maybe the capability's the same, but one of them needs to...
I'm actually going to say no. We're going to build... We're wanting to build an app that behaves that way. But the architecture is no. So the confusion here is because in Gun there is no client server, technically. That doesn't prevent us from building an app that does have a client server. The important part is Gun itself doesn't treat them as being different. So the weird thing is, if we're writing the code on the server of Gun, it's almost as if here's the analogy. In the same way, I might, with Gun, write a module that persists to Level as a disk.
Mm-hmm.
The analogy here is similar because the server, in the sense that you're saying it's the boss, it holds more data, is almost Level. We have a client, which is the Electron apps, which are putting data to us, get sent to us, and then we are storing it. So in one sense, from our server perspective, we're flipping the view, and it's almost as if we are Level itself. Somebody has sent us data, and now we're going to write to it. So just the confusion here is that since Gun is on both sides, I'm trying to clarify that we're on a Gun peer that is receiving data from another Gun peer.
Right.
And just to help with the confusion, that then Gun peer, which is receiving data from another Gun peer, is then going to send that data to something else like Level. So let me pull open.
Lightsabers.
Did we switch channels, or are you still there?
We're still here. Can you hear Jesse?
Yeah.
Okay, we can't hear Jesse.
So it sounds like we've got a centralized setting with a whole bunch of peers connecting. But the main problem, what it sounds like, is merge conflicts if you want to disable the change. Say, you know, they're not authorized for that sort of change, then how do we revert that back? And so we've always got a consistent model of what the so all of our models are eventually consistent. Whereas
Yes,
it's not just preventing it at the server. Is that what I'm understanding, or is that about right?
You're cutting out there, so if you could go through that again.
All right. Yeah. So for the server,
Yeah.
it sounds like we've got a whole bunch of clients that are mutating data, and they're forwarding those changes off onto the server. Now,
Right.
if the server rejects those as not authorized, then we need some way to make sure that that reverts back on the local clients. Is
Right.
that?
Yeah.
yes.
You know, yeah. Like basically, the server needs to be able to say yay or nay to operations, and if that's communicating it back in the form of a mutation, then fine. But I guess at the end of the day, what I would want to be able to do is have a person, for instance, and this user can write to it, and this user can only read it.
Correct. So everything Jesse said was correct. Sorry, I'm very long-winded because I wind up focusing on the actual step-by-step details to get there, and that drives Sean nuts because that I never step back and look at the overall. So that what Jesse just said and what you said is possible, and my nitpickiness is now trying to go into the exact mechanics of doing it and hopefully write some code that we can then share between us. That way.
No, when you say it's possible, that's fine, and I'd be interested in seeing. Is it? Am I forcing Gun into a situation that it maybe wouldn't be the best choice?
So Gun is designed for, by default, Gun is peer-to-peer. So it assumes that there is no central master. Now, the important part here is the composability of these systems, which is if you start with a database that is master-slave, that has exactly what you're talking about, you cannot take that database and go into a federated system. So let's say you wanted to build email. You don't want to build email, but just the example here.
Yeah.
You would not be able to take your master database and then build email out of that. Okay? You couldn't go past that point either. If you wanted to build something like BitTorrent, you could not build BitTorrent with a master-slave database.
Mm-hmm.
One, by default, is master-master or peer-to-peer. The sweet thing about that is it has the ability to compose upwards. So in a peer-to-peer setting, a federated system is a subset of a peer-to-peer system. So we are able to build email with a BitTorrent-like design. So Gun can do a BitTorrent as well as federated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can also build a centralized service with Gun because one peer, or I should say one master, is just a subset of, so you can always go upwards. Now, I'm going to be open. Gun's use case, let me clarify. I am building Gun to run my own centralized service, which is a web design tool.
Okay.
The thing is, when I was building that out using MongoDB and Express and stuff like that, I encountered a ton of problems. Would have to wake up in the middle of the night. The database would crash and nothing would be working, even if the application server was fine, even if the CDN was fine, even if the client-side front-end logic was fine. If the database went out, then everything went out, and that was super, super annoying. So I want to run, and I'm building Gun to run for my own personal use case in a service that I control. However, I want the service that I control to be fully peer-to-peer as if it's BitTorrent. So I use Amazon's infrastructure to spin up, 50 server peers that all communicate with each other. And they act as my centralized service relative to outside users that are using my service. But internally, inside of the infrastructure, they're running as if it's a completely peer-to-peer BitTorrent-like, because that allows me to sleep through at night, because if anyone crashes, it doesn't matter. So in order to do that, though, I'm trying to be careful to make sure that gun does work in a fully peer-to-peer setting, because if it doesn't work in a fully peer-to-peer setting, then it's not going to be useful even in my own infrastructure at survival.
So the project you're talking about that inspired you to go this route, you would be building APIs into these this pool of servers, so to speak?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I worked for a company, OrientDB, which does...
working for OrientDB.
Yeah, so they did master replication there as well.
Yeah.
So I understand the topic, and
they're one of the few that do.
Yeah.
And they have graph stuff too, which makes me really, really happy.
Yeah. So I understand the concept. I guess so. To me, maybe that's my answer is I need to be building an API into it. But the other way that I was thinking was for my particular business case I'm thinking is the privacy is really per account. I'm not needing to get into user-specific stuff. Once you get into
Hi, Penguin Man. Okay, go on.
Once you get into an account, the trust level is extremely high. So that's when I was on Gitter. I said, would it make sense to just, spin up a DigitalOcean 12 megabyte virtual VPS for each account, and that sounds like that might be a viable way of segregating accounts, right?
Yes. Okay. So now we're getting into some really interesting stuff. Sorry, maybe I've been dumbing things down too much. I guess I wasn't familiar that you've worked with for Wakanda and OrientDB before, so you're understanding all this talk. So I apologize if I been roundabout and laymanish. Yeah. So exactly what you said in terms of how you previously worded your app. Yes, you should basically be building an API that people feed into that then runs Gun internally.
Okay, now how do I get the benefits of the Firebase-ish, the Gun-ish push into the browser, all these nice things? Or am I building that out myself, which is kind of counter...
Well, right. So that's possible, but it wouldn't necessarily... That's not ideal. Yeah. Really quickly, there's a fork in the road here, though, because you just mentioned potentially designing the app where every single user essentially has their own dedicated peer. And that is technically a fully peer-to-peer setting, even if you're upfront cost for their VPS. Yeah. And those two security models, let's say, require a different approach. So I want to make sure we choose which branch to go down. Let me read the question in my mind when you get a moment to address it. If the gun... How do I...
There is a chat up in the top right with the blue. Yeah.
Okay. If the gun DB holds state with the program while the clients who have the program go offline, and a new one tries to enter, what happens? So you're not Amber Brodick, Penguin Man. Okay, I'm just gonna call you Penguin Man. What is your actual name? I mean, you don't have to reveal it over the internet if you don't want to. Okay, Joe.
Hi, Joe.
So, Joe, this was the first question I asked Greg earlier, which is, depends upon whether your setup is a centralized app, a centralized service like Facebook or Google, or whether you're doing completely peer-to-peer. I'm going to assume that most people want centralized services because that's kind of what I want, but with the redundancy of a peer-to-peer system. So if you're running a centralized service, well, the server peer is not ever going to go offline, or even if it goes offline, for instance, we have the Heroku app that's running as a demo. It occasionally does get shut down, but the data is persisted to S3. So that one peer always has the data and is typically, when a new client joins, is going to be the first and potentially only peer that it talks to, and so it's going to receive the data from that peer because it's the strong man. So that's no different than how you'd be building all your other apps. Now, if you're happening to build like a fully peer-to-peer system, then yes, if you come online and you cannot connect to anybody else, you're not going to be able to load the data. However, there are keys in Gun work around the problem of two people while offline, writing to the same data, never having seen each other's data, and it still being able to resolve. There are some edge cases to it, but I want to go back to the discussion we were having with Greg. So we have a branching point. Do we want to go down a very traditional centralized approach, or the fully kind of decentralized, every person has their own gun,
or even a hybrid approach?
Yeah, well, the thing is that I want to consider is I'm talking electron. Offline is very important to me. So that's one of the key selling points to me with Gun is it's like your own SQLite on each instance. It's got the full copy of the data. So that is important to me for sure.
Yeah, and since you've got Electron, you've got access to a lot of the Node API there too. So you've got a lot more reliable persistence.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we go down that route, then the security models. The security model is going to be very different. Essentially, everybody's going to have their own private key, which isn't shared to anybody else. However, there are problems with that. Last meetup, we talked about encryption and stuff like that. And they're going to encrypt all their data with that private key. There's a bunch of other things in here, of course. You don't want to just randomly generate a private key. You want to use a key extender, blah, blah, blah. And to be honest, you probably know way more about that stuff than me, because I only researched it like just a few months ago to answer some of my own questions, and it was very, very confusing doing all the cryptography stuff. But I did build a demo app that's probably broken and buggy right now that does do the fully peer-to-peer encryption. So then, since all the data is encrypted, you don't really have to worry about where it's being stored or where it's being sent, because nobody's going to be able to decrypt it unless they like get a rack of Bitcoin GPUs and then brute force it. And even if so, you just increase the entropy on your encryption. So that means read and write are now very harshly controlled for. And there's two approaches then, which is if you want to maintain the integrity of the data, you're going to want to have any one peer, when they want to read the data from another peer, have to request, do a request response from that peer. However, if that peer is offline, then they're not going to be able to get that answer fulfilled. But that maintains the integrity of the data. You're guaranteed that the data is always going to be the freshest and the latest, which is moving more towards like a strongly consistent approach at a per user level. The other approach is you decide who you want to share the data with, and you go ahead and make extra encryptions of the data with their public key or whatever it is that they are able to store on their machine, and you always push those updates out to those people. So that way, even if you're offline, they're still able to read your data because you've encrypted it with them. Now, that's ultimately not, unfortunately, super scalable, because if you happen to have like 10,000 friends that you send a single tweet to or something like that, that means you're having to do 10,000 different encryptions on that message out. Then you get into like, which is why sometimes the middleman is necessary. However, it seems like with this Electron app, we're not necessarily talking about a Facebook scale of users, right? It sounds like this sounds like a very in-house team-oriented thing, right?
Yeah, like mine is focused on small and medium business, so you might get 10 or 20 users on one system tops.
Yeah, then that's never going to be a problem.
Now, what about another solution is using authentication, and so there's no actual persistence or relaying unless the client is authorized to work with that data.
That was the first approach, right? Where
that was the encryption.
Where no, that rather than for every friend that you know, you encrypt the data with their public key and send it out to them. People have to come to you to ask for the data. However, that means if you're offline, they're not able to read the data. But that does maintain the integrity, because then you're doing off on your DigitalOcean peer.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, without a doubt, there's some different thinking that needs to happen, and that's cool, you know. And that's the thing, is gun's a different tool, so I'm trying to figure out how should I be thinking about these things, because first off, the idea of everyone having a copy of the data is one thing. Now, that brings me to a topic of, so you can request, say, a certain attribute chain, and that's all the data that comes to the client, is what I understand.
So I should delineate on that. It is the data that the client then subscribes to and prioritizes and fetches. Now, because it's a mesh network, it's technically allowed for all the data to be broadcasted to all the peers, but those peers don't necessarily persist that data. Does that make sense? So they might help with relaying the message through the chain,
okay. Right.
but it's not what they are subscribed to.
So does every peer have a full set of the data? And no. Okay.
Well, I mean, it can, but
it can, but not. But if I were to say I want Greg.people.George, and that's all my Georges, that's all that would be on that client.
More or less, yes.
Except for you're saying that it helps channel it to other.
Yes.
So there's some behind the scenes stuff that would be there in some fashion.
Right.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's a bunch of edge cases on that and like implementation details that we haven't like quite finished, because by far the easiest way for people to get their app launched and deployed is to not go down this route of, you know, a fully peer-to-peer encrypted system, because in order to do that, it's not so much thinking about it in terms of gun, but it's thinking about it in just terms of a truly peer-to-peer encrypted system, which is a lot of technical expertise to have.
Yeah. No, just you describing it, it sounds fairly unapproachable unless you put some good homework into it. Let's put it that way.
We are doing the homework and slowly building and moving towards that end. However, obviously it's not the easiest thing ever, and it's taking a lot of time to get there. So hopefully we'll be able to provide a set of tools that essentially make it snap your fingers. Easy to build. Right now, you pretty much have to help with building towards that.
So what would you describe as a bread and butter use case for gun?
Right now, bread and butter use case, and then we've been going over this a bunch because we're looking for customer pilots, is semi-public data as real-time data sync. So that is a bunch of jargon words, but realistically what that means is take Uber and Lyft. When you order an Uber, you see where the driver is on your map, and in real time, the map updates with the GPS coordinates. That information of the driver doesn't really, and I'm sure a bunch of people will yell at me for this statement, the information of that driver doesn't necessarily need to be like hardcore encrypted. It just needs to be like hard to find. Does that make sense? Where if I have a Google Doc, anybody can realistically access it if they have the link.
Right. It's like putting something in S3 that's got a huge UUID as the URL. It is kind of security, but anyone who is a purist would say it's security by obscurity, and it's not good.
The security by obscurity is terrible. However, it's very, very easy, useful, and practical because it's
totally. It's useful in a bunch of places.
Yeah. So that that type of setting where like, oh, okay, gun would be a really, really great fit for that type of setting. You have some middleman, Lyft, that then receives a request potentially completely outside of gun. I mean, it doesn't really matter. That says, okay, hey, give me the temporary token key for this driver's GPS coordinates.
Right.
And then they say, okay, here's the key, and then on my phone, it just does a gun.get, that key, and then .on, and now I'm receiving an object which has lat long that I then project onto my map. And it's as simple as that. And then it'd be nice once we get WebRTC working, which Jesse's been working on.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
Oh, yeah.
The slowdown actually is us with releasing 0.3. We've changed some of the wire API, so I told him just wait until we get that nailed down more. is the great thing is then at that point you can actually hand off the connection between my phone and the Lyft driver to be completely peer-to-peer, and it doesn't even have to go through Lyft server.
Yeah.
Right? So save a ton of money, you get the real-time updates for free, and it's great. So that's a perfect use case. Another use case is, let's say, airline seating inventory. And this can get into a debate upon how you approach inventory management, but the issue is airlines have been doing seating reservation way before the internet existed, and there was like 2 weeks where there's like a 2-week time period where two people might book the same seat, and like to them, okay, so a lot of programmers out there whine and complain how they talk about like, oh, the system isn't perfectly strongly consistent when you're ordering, something off of Amazon. The inventory is always slightly out of date and blah, 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 blah. And I think the amount of effort you have to go to provide that, like, loses value that you can give to the user. So,
I mean, you're essentially paying for customer experience, and so, I mean, if you go to that extra mile, you might be waiting for 15 minutes for a strongly consistent model. And
the user does not want to sit around for 15 minutes.
No, they're happy with a 98% or 99%
guarantee. Yeah. Especially if their network is working, then it's probably going to work. I need to be reading Penguin Man. I'm going to read it in 1 second. I wanted to make a note was when I flew out to Seattle just the other week, and actually there's been every single time I'm in the airport, they have the kiosks there that I use to check in. And it drives me nuts because it's super slow because you click check in and it literally spends loading, confirming for a good probably 10 seconds. I'm not exaggerating. 10 seconds is a long time we're trying to get through TSA and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I know why it's doing that, because it's going back up to some server and doing some strongly consistent system and then coming back down and then saying, oh, done and confirmed. But I think that's ridiculous from a user experience side because, I mean, yeah, I'm trying to get through TSA. I don't want to wait, so the 10 seconds is the worst possible time. But it's also dumb because they know I'm going to be at that airport. They could have front-loaded that data to those kiosks, right? And those kiosks could then become, quote, the master for that particular data set. That then it runs instantly. If you wanted to maintain a master-based system. But no, they don't, and so it's all slow. And so, that is a real-world example in flying why this stuff is slow.
Yeah, so I'm reading Penguin Man's comment as well, and it seems to me that he's got the right idea here where at this point, you're going to have tons of people come to you want to build their entire application. Can Gun do everything? And the answer should be no. And he's got the right idea here, is you take little segments that work, and that's maybe where it makes sense, right?
Yes. Thus, going back to the highly modular design of Gun, that not even the transport protocol or the persistence layer is explicitly defined or baked. So Gun, to one degree, is more just it's more just a protocol rule that anybody can implement. But design, okay. The peer applications need access all the available data. There can be multiple peer apps of different flavors that access different parts of the data security by obscurity. I'm helping with a convention who wants to sell entrance packages, so I wanted to suggest using Gun to do real-time tracking of how many of X packages have been sold and make sure they don't oversell. Yes, see, yeah, that is a great example. As long as you're not one of those annoying people that thinks you have to have perfectly strongly consistent systems when people.
Yeah. Whereas in his case, or her case, I don't know, or Penguin Man. So in his case, if they oversell by 5 or 10, really, it's no difference. Put another row of chairs and.
Yeah, put another row of chairs, or you.
It can be a little fuzzy if it needed to be.
Like what Amazon does. They say, oops, your order didn't go through. Here's a free Amazon voucher for 20% off. And then people are like,
yeah.
Well, okay. That's annoying, but okay. So, yeah, okay. So inventory management, like what Joe just said, and the Lyft Uber stuff is the perfect case study for Gun right now, which means it's ultimately still running through a centralized service, but you're running on your dashboard, whether that's the user's dashboard or not, to basically get the updates as fast as possible and hopefully because you're connected, and hopefully because you're connected and getting that update as fast as possible, you mitigate, 99% of it that could happen anyways.
Right.
You're getting the data updated in real time.
Yeah.
And
Now you have. Sorry, go ahead.
another thing to mention for that Uber application is the security concern of broadcasting the user's or the driver's location. Now, since the state is synced between all the systems, they have access to whether or not their location is actually being requested, and they have the choice of whether or not they actually want to broadcast.
Right.
So also the decision of whether or not they want to put the data into the system in the first place.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm going to add to that, which is if you're also running this service, that means you also control the client code more or less.
Mm-hmm.
So you can very, very easily in your client code just say, like, let's say the person who's receiving the Lyft updates, that you can just say, oh, make this be in memory only, the data that I'm receiving. Basically just turn off persistence on this browser peer. And then that way you're still getting the real-time updates, but if the user refreshes, they still have to forcibly pull it from the server. Make sense?
Yeah.
And so I like security by obscurity for the most part. That doesn't mean I still have to design and build systems that are truly secure, but I think security by obscurity.
It has a lot of practical use cases. I'll agree with you on that.
Cases, exactly.
And like you said, only someone who's ignoring the real world will argue with you on that. There is a place for it,
right?
In my mind.
Yes.
Because when I'm talking to a person, I'm generally fine with them being trustworthy. I know it's not infallible, but I take that risk, right? So same idea, except probably a lot more secure.
Well, to make sure they don't oversell them. These are 1,000 packages. If we oversell one and they expect a certain benefit, then we're really screwed if we only have X to give out, because now we either lose the 1,000 sale or have to come up with another prize of equal value. So, Penguin Man, a couple questions. First, is this the sort of thing with the $1,000 package that like read only? Yeah. So, like in the browser, you just disable local storage.
Or on the server. Same. I mean, it's isometric. So you, in this scenario, you've got control of all of that. So you could prevent writes to the server or to the client, even programmatically.
So with these $1,000 packages, just from a business standpoint, is it the sort of thing that Greg said that, if you sell one more, you can just like add another chair to the room type thing? I mean, probably wouldn't be just a chair because I don't think people are paying $1,000 for a chair. But is it that sort of thing?
Well, the other thing to ask is he selling 20 of them a second?
Yeah. Okay.
That's a good question.
So, what is the maximum number that this venue can hold? Because just from a business perspective, you don't want to actually sell the total maximum. You want to sell something just slightly short, and then sell the remainder in a controlled environment when it gets there. Now, that's not like a gun thing. That's not even a programming thing. That's just like how you approach your business. Because it is very, very dangerous, regardless of whether you're using gun or a strong and consistent system or not, that if you only have 20 slots exactly, that you then like go ahead and sell all 20 immediately, because that's just asking for problems. You want to like sell 19 and then control the release of the one.
And now you've got a strong demand for it.
Right.
Raise the price
for
$2,000 a chair.
Well, all these packages grant entrance. The bigger package gives you sweet swag, so imagine a collectible. Okay, so
that's a good one.
High demand concepts, like sometimes tickets, they have like 2,000 tickets and they go away in a minute.
Right.
So how do they control that?
Well, so
like
gun
100?
helps with that better than I'd say some of the other things, but
You can also do a lottery.
as well as a lottery. But I do want to point out, it looks like with your setup, Joe, I don't know the exact setup, but it sounds, since there is the bigger the swag that's being released, is if let's say you do have exactly 20 slots and you sell out exactly 20, but somebody happened to sell 21. it sounds like, and this isn't very happy, but it sounds like you can refund the one individual their money back and say that no, they can't come. Again, that's still bad design, because I'd say you'd sell 19 and then control the release of the one. But with the setup you're talking about here, it does sound like if you do oversell, you can refund them. Now, an exact 100% refund satisfies a lot of people, but I'd still say that's bad business because it's on your part. So same thing with what Amazon does. Hopefully either, if you have exactly 20 spots and you have the one extra, hopefully you'll be able to squeeze them in, but let's just say you can't. You refund and then give them a free pass to next year's event or something like that.
But also, if you throttle closer or not as close to the end, and then just control more the receipts.
Yeah, it's saying that, well, that requires more programming to program.
It also depends on how much you trust your users. You could also check the timestamp of when they were sent.
Right, to do conflict resolution.
That could be, messed with.
Right, which is untrustable. So the other thing, I want to go back to Greg's comment, which is, how many of these are you going to sell in a second? If it's a high-demand concert, then yeah, there's probably going to be a concern there, which is where you would want to do throttling. However, it sounds for your venue, it's going to be pretty small and intimate, so you're probably not selling 2 items literally at Newtonian objective time, 1 millisecond between each people. It's probably, you're talking to one person and then selling them on it, and then going and talking to the next person and selling them on it. So just your selling process is probably serial. Or even if it's giving them a link that they then go to the website, it's very, very, very unlikely that 2 people are going to purchase at exactly the same moment. Now, here's the thing. I'm not saying that, therefore, you should not use Gun if that is a concern. I'd say that's actually why you'd want to use Gun more, because if they are purchasing, at least for stating who's purchasing, you'd want to use Gun. Oh, I should probably finish reading. Tech exists to avoid it, so we want to use, if possible, the event is big, on scale. Oh, half Comic-Con. Okay. Okay, so you're going to be selling a lot really quickly. Okay. So the sort of thing that you would want to do is what Jesse was saying. You're going to want to throttle the flow of that. And that's not just our crazy idea. You see that happening all the time with, let's just say, every single tech startup that launches a splash page that then has a waiting list, that they then accept people in chunks and chunks and chunks so they can handle availability. And the nice thing is you can programmatically write that throttling. So the next thing is, even if you want, ignoring the throttling, is you can use Gun. Let's say you do use a strongly consistent database, let's say like Postgres, that the sales of the tickets are controlled for. You still want to use Gun on the front end of your website, so that way when people click add to cart, at that point you sync that data over to all the other people who are currently on the website. So this is before they've actually clicked the purchase button. So you preemptively with Gun sync. Who's currently reading. You know how when you're typing a message, oftentimes it says, Penguin Man is typing a message. And that's done to preemptively prevent 2 people from typing at once and responding. So that way it gives the other person time to pause and wait for the response. You don't want to do the same thing with this, which is, even if you're using Postgres as the strongly consistent database that is actually doing the ticket transactions, you still want to use Gun to have that preemptive who's currently looking at this, and then using that information on each other peer to basically say, oh, okay, I am looking at this ticket, somebody else is looking at this ticket. They click add to shopping cart. That gets real-time pushed to me, and even though they haven't clicked purchased yet, you should, on my screen, when I receive that update, I should treat it as if it was a purchase with then a 15-minute timeout, and that's what most websites do with well, I think airline reservations will do a 45-minute timeout, but Eventbrite has a 15-minute timeout that you have to fill out your information and click reserve to Eventbrite within 15 minutes, because they're locking that value for the 15 minutes to prevent this type of conflict. Okay, that was a lot of rambling. So, lots of techniques. Throttling up to your maximum capacity. Still using a strongly consistent transactional database that you then hope doesn't crash because you have a huge demand and you lose all of those sales and you cannot recover from them because it's not Gun. Still using a transactional, strongly consistent database in the back end that you have to make sure doesn't blow up in your face. And still using Gun at a preemptive shopping cart for doing quasi-distributed lock at the shopping cart level. Yeah. Any other questions? From Penguin Man, although we got distracted with Greg. And how much longer do you guys have? Because it's already been like an hour.
Yeah, I'm going to take off soon. I think the thing I got most out of this is I need to understand where Gun fits best, rather than trying to stranglehold it into something it's not.
Right.
So that it will take a little bit of thinking, and my initial thought is it's not going to cover everything I need, but certainly would cover elements of what I need.
Also, another thing about Gun is that generally we tend towards the other end of the spectrum, whereas instead of strangling it towards what you need in your system, it's a lot less opinionated. So it's meant to be modular and bare bones, where it actually doesn't have many opinions about your application. You're the one who adds those opinions or gets someone else.
Yeah, well, and then you get down to how much work would it be for me to program those opinions. So, you know, there could be tools that bring me a lot further down the road for certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've got a better understanding of what those
of course. So
what those things are.
In the current status of what Gun is right now, the security through obscurity real-time sync is the perfect fit. So I don't know if that's what you're looking for your app right now. However,
like I said, not for the entire thing, but there are elements where that fits perfectly.
So the next side, though, is we're releasing this new version of Gun. We're trying to move forward in those directions. So it's also then a plea that, like, okay, maybe Gun at its current version isn't a perfect fit for this other X thing that you're doing. I would still strongly appreciate if you were to use Gun for that, just to find the bugs and work through the edge cases. So that way we then know what to do to refine that. Now, that's asking a lot for you. But if you're open to that type of something.
Well, yeah, not everything. In fact, I would say most of the projects a lot of developers do is personal learning, personal side projects, you know, experimentation, and those can be really valuable too.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, maybe I don't put it in the battlefield of huge production, but yeah, I'm happy to tinker with it without a doubt, and try and see what it can do. So to me, initial questions are, so I read something, we don't have a query language, we let you use JavaScript. So that being, I can sort of use logic to get to a certain particular place in the database versus doing a query language.
It's a very
so if I'm wanting to query over a group of data, I first need to go to a point that brings in the data to the application, and then I can iterate through that however I want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's obviously going to be slow if A, you don't have the data pre-cached in your machine, or even if you do have the data pre-cached in your machine, you're still having to iterate over it, even if it's in memory. And Gun. So this is another rant of mine. Do you want me to go on it, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, let me grab some more.
Oh, it's going to be a good rant then.
Oh, yeah.
Getting refueled.
So the whole no query language is a pretty big controversy as well. Right now, the setup is that we have an application server that speaks over the wire. Sorry, not for Gun. I just mean most startups or most tech businesses in general. You have an application server that actually, what? I have a flag for this. So I'm going to switch it to that.
Are we screen sharing?
Yeah, I'm going to screen share just once I pull up. That did not pull up anything that I wanted to Google. Thank you for being a terrible search engine. Oh, they split it into these different segmented, isolated stuff, and it won't search across them. And here it is. Which one is it? It's probably, I think it's this one. Okay, now I'm going to switch this to, how did I do? Okay, wonderful. Entire screen share. All right, can you see?
I can see, yes.
Cool. I'm going to skip down to the section, the very fun talk where I offend a lot of people. Right. Okay. So this talk is called "Everything You're Doing Wrong with Data," and it goes over 5 myths of databases from my biased view, which is.
Yeah. So I watched your presentation.
Okay.
I think you've been through this, but you probably say something.
You already see my rant, then you understand the rant. It's ridiculous that we have this middleman application server that you write your logic in, and then you have this, quote, safe query language, which is, in order for it to be interesting, has to be Turing complete, so therefore it's just another programming language, that you write in string concatenations inside of your other programming language that then has to get serialized to the database over here, for then the database to do some sort of ultimately login type operation if it has the type of indices, normish-ish indices, which means it has to be pulling from disk, iterating over stuff in memory, doing the filters, and then after it's done all that work, to then re-serialize the data over the wire that you then read out on the other end. That's the worst of both worlds. So the whole big data movement, right, was saying like, hey, data is going to grow, and application logic stays at some finite size, even if it's millions and millions of lines of Java. If we just take the, okay, I'm gonna switch back to so you can see my silly expressions. If we just take the application code and inject it into the data side, if we take code to the data, then we can do all the logic pretty fast. And that is a very brilliant solution. Why I'm sure the big data movement has taken off. ArangoDB is doing that. I think OrientDB does. Does OrientDB do that?
Say that again.
Does OrientDB say, hey, we have our data, we're going to take the application logic and move it to the data?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. And so the big data movement,
like you can store functions and stuff like this, but I don't think it does exactly what you're talking about.
no, right?
What's that?
People don't really make use of that, though, right?
No.
Okay. So the very smart move of the big data is them saying, hey, data can get big. You don't want to be sending terabytes of data over the network all the time. Gunn said, let's move the data to the application, which does entail having to potentially move a lot of data, which is slow. But we also said, hey, what if we figured out concurrency control? If we do figure out concurrency control, we can cache it and potentially incrementally feed it to the client as it gets written, and then you don't have to worry about doing.
Yeah, the best World Wide Web that it could ever possibly be would be the entire World Wide Web on everyone's computer, right? And then synchronization's happening. That would be, but it's not practical. So with Gun, you're segmenting that down into probably data. You're going to have use cases where that does make sense. Disconnected applications are a big interest of mine. That's essentially what you're doing well that I see and has brought me here. And like I said, it's understanding what it, and I know Gun will grow in capability and that type of thing. So it's just understanding the general direction you're going in, where you want to go, what the use cases are today. These are the things that I want to get most out of the time.
So the other thing is, regardless of which of those operations you decide, whether you have the middle application server that does the back and forth between the data,
Right.
or you decide to move code to the database or the data to the code, you still cannot avoid ON operations if you haven't thought about those operations in advance. And that was my section, which I don't think I probably communicated myself very well in the everything doing wrong talk about indexing stuff. Like, you can make everything super fast if you know all of your queries in advance and you index everything at insertion time. It's essentially O1 and free, and then when you want to look up that data, it's essentially O1. And ultimately, that is kind of what a lot of the big data stuff did, since they have the logic on the data.
We should probably also mention for the video, you've probably seen this. Gun also has indexing built straight into the tool itself called keys.
Yeah.
So whereas even if you choose to do a slower operation, you can index at that time. So the next time you come through that, it'll be magnitude faster.
Yeah, and that's thank you, Jesse, because that is like literally exactly where I was going. So even admitting that Gun is slow with this whole potential terabyte transfer of data and doing the filtering of the logic in your own programming language that then requires to have it on your client, the goal is you do that once, and now that you know that query, you just index it as the query happens, and then forever after, it's fast. So even if there's terabytes of data, you're then only transferring that one bit. So exactly what Jesse said. So kind of why I then chose this more controversial approach, because at the end of the day, indexing is awesome and can make magic out of queries. The issue is you just kind of have to know those queries in advance. But regardless of how amazing of a database you can build, my point is you're never going to get away from the ON operation, no matter what. And so to me, I say embrace it, do it as a batch job or at insertion time. Well, okay, at insertion time if you know in advance, or a batch job at the point, and then let it be available afterwards.
Yeah, it's like eating an elephant one bite at a time, right? You do it as you go, and then you don't have the big thing. Yeah.
Now, with that said, I ran into a problem. And this is part of the changes from 0.1 to 0.2 to 0.3, which is people started asking me, hey, Mark, I put data into Gun. How do I find it? I didn't put a key on it. And I was like, you put a key on the entry node or something like that? Well, I don't have any mechanism to scan through the data, because one of the whole reasons why I built Gun was doing optimized O1 key lookups and then doing scanning operations. So that came up enough times I realized, okay, from just a distributed perspective, I need to have service discovery at some point, and service discovery requires asking a minimal amount of questions to other peers. I do not want to call this a query language, although I'm going to unabashedly say it will be hacked into and abused into being used as a query language. But from a practical perspective, but from a theoretical perspective, I need to stay strong and sound that it's not going to be. So, Gun, does it already have? No, it's going to have. It might already have. I don't know. Has lexical cursors, and you can then use lexical cursors to hack a query out of that. So my lexical cursor is, I want Gun to also work on a machine that has very, very little memory footprint. So if it's then trying to stream a terabyte of data that it iterates over, it's not gonna get through all the operation before it just runs out of memory. So you should be able to expire the data as you're processing the data, stream it. In order to do that, that means the client that's trying to pull the data needs to be able to state that it has like a byte limit to how much data it can receive. And so if you then have a byte limit of when it's pulling the data, the peer that's pushing the data to you then needs to understand where to like resume that streaming operation.
Essentially paging the data in a way.
Yes. And so I chose a lexical cursor, which is basically I say here's my byte limit, and then you probably start at 0 or A or whatever your initial character is. And this will be automated for you. The developer shouldn't have to think about this stuff. Then the server, well, the peer that is sending the data streams out everything that it can up to that byte limit. And then, since Gun's graph architecture says that there's only a universal ID, a field, a value, and a state, the peer that received it then just looks at the last field or the last UID that it received, and then when it resumes, then once it's done with processing that data, it then does a lexical query to the server saying, okay, here's my byte limit again. It's got to be stateless, and start at this field, which was the last one I received, and then it starts streaming through. And so that is the reason why I'm, quote, adding this to Gun, but I'm at a theoretical level saying this is strongly a service discovery and byte constraint mechanism. It's a lexical cursor. It's not a query language. However, then from a practical standpoint, we're going to abuse the living daylights out of it.
Yeah.
Or
the natural process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, you said you need to get going, and I just went on 2 rants rather than the one. Oh, one last comment, which is if you do know that query in advance, nothing stops you from setting up a route with that query that then acts as your so you can always implement you can always implement a query language in Gun by saying that I have a server that receives a route that you know in advance that then streams the data from the Gun server out down that route to the client. Does that make sense?
Not entirely.
You can write your own API outside of Gun that has that query known in advance.
Right.
That then you make the request, standard request response from client to that route, which is your query, and then the server does a gun.get and then filters the data, which is already in memory in the server, and then only streams those pieces down to now. So that's just one extra edge case. Obviously, you don't. It's annoying to write that extra logic, but it's essentially writing the exact same thing, but then just doing over. Well, yeah. All right. I thank you so much for jumping on. A lot of people get scared to do Skypes and actually sit down and talk and go through code. So I actually really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's no problem. It's been helpful, and I think if I were giving feedback to you,
yes, please.
The thing I would focus on as a group is really defining where your bread and butter is, and trying to discover some relatable business cases that illustrate that. And because the more you get people coming in thinking that Gun is going to do everything under the sun, you're going to have people disappointed with it, and that's how you don't get traction. So I'd really just start hammering on what you're good at. Like the one thing you did was the real-time updates was the first thing that you really pointed out, and you're strong with that. And look at all the attention you got. Now, if you can start pointing out, okay, here's 10 business cases where it makes perfect sense. That's where I'd be going with it.
So we have one lead to a very, very, very big customer, which I'm super, super excited about. The issue is really, 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 really big customers move very, very, very slowly, and we'll only have so much of a runway. So my question back to you is, if we do have those business use cases nailed down and defined, how, and I've been trying to get in contact with every possible business development strategist person that I can find. How do you get those leads to those customers? How do you land, or
how do you get the name and phone number and start talking?
Yeah.
There's a ton of different ways to do that. Primarily, the first thing you got to get is you need to get the eyeballs. That's the hardest part, right? Part of it's luck. Ultimately, the best thing for you would be someone who gets super successful and is using Gun and publicizes it.
Right.
That is the ultimate goal, and you're doing the right thing by sort of babying any lead you get right now. Like, this is when you're in a startup, any lead you get, you just work it until the day when you've got so many leads and you've got material to support them. But it's very hands-on at the beginning. And if you've got one really good lead, just work, be completely there, always keeping your ear open for the next one.
Right.
But you just need to have a bigger mouth, and developers sometimes aren't good at that. Right?
So
the more people you talk to, huh?
How do we have a bigger mouth?
Well, sometimes it's actually being proactive about it and making some calls or making some outreaching contacts, which is getting more difficult these days. You know, with LinkedIn only lets you do it if they've given you permission to contact them. So, you know, essentially it's sales. You know, let's call it what it is. If you want to get a startup going, you have to have an element of selling. That's the world. And there's modern selling and there's old school selling. You know, modern selling involves more pulling than pushing. But you know, I don't know exactly what you're going for. Again, the first thing you need to do is you need to find out the use case. And as soon as you find a little niche that works, you just hammer on that niche, and you exhaust that, and then you move to the next one, So if you've got maybe your lowest lying fruit would be find businesses online that you can see that their business could use it, right? And then approach them with a business solution.
And then like cold call and stuff like that.
Yeah, say, hey, listen, have you thought of?
Well,
I think you're at the point where you probably got the time to do it. You know, you've got technical responsibilities, absolutely, but the technical stuff all means nothing if no one's using it.
Right.
And that's like you say, you've got artists in the room. What artist wants to create a beautiful piece of work so no one sees it?
I wasn't pointing to him saying that he does want to create art that nobody sees.
Ultimately, every musician, every painter, every person in a creative endeavor, which I think software development can certainly fit into, wants an audience to appreciate it. And so I think either find someone who would take that role or get good at it yourself, because that's going to be a big part of your.
I have another question.
I just wanted to say I like where you said that for businesses where you just you contact them and say, hey, you know, have you considered this? Because since Gun is unorthodox, we could probably suggest features that they've never even dreamt of and say, we can do that for you. It's out of the box.
Right.
So you brought that up there.
So that's more of a consulting business than anything, which long term most people don't want to do these days. It's a very difficult business to make a lot of money at, but many startups start in a consulting type of fashion until they can scale.
Right.
And really, as soon as you can get over that bridge of scaling, that's when the fun stuff happens. And you know, a talk at a seminar leads to opportunities that you could never dream of because you've got that attention.
Right. And being an open source company, it really does start with that consulting stuff, unfortunately, because I do like scalable systems, and I realize that consulting isn't scalable. But the issue is you use that consulting to then build tools that are automate, and then you just resell on them.
Right. You know, get the word out, and but you've got obviously an interesting technology here that a lot of people could use.
So another quick question. Sorry, we're keeping you so.
Good.
My investors have connected me to probably like 3 or 4 different like business development strategists at, you know, various different bigger companies and stuff like that. And they've been helping me, but I find this problem where I'm not trying to stereotype or generalize, but like a lot of business people want to talk about all the leads and the connections they have, but then they don't do anything.
Yeah. The other thing, if I were hiring for you, I'd say you want someone who's got a good blend of technical plus promotional stuff. You know, not a strict business guy. You're too small for that at this point. You need someone who can actually implement some examples, talk to people on a more technical level, not, you know, a complete egghead. There's always other people that can talk to them about it, but get through the door, get past the typical questions, and clearly understand the use cases. That's what you need. You know, I would say I don't have a, you know, I've been in business development, so I know that there's a scale there. You've got some people that are too technical and not enough people, and you've got people that are, you know, completely not technical. And you need a nice blend right in the middle, because you've only probably got access to one person. So they kind of need to go fill a lot of that spectrum. You don't have salespeople with support teams and tech help and all this type of thing. You need someone who can be a little more agile in that, just tackle things as they go. But yeah, like someone coming from, anyways, I don't want to mention names, but take any of these old school database companies where they were known as, like, you know, hit them hard sales, drive it down their throat. That's not what you need at all. You know, I think you need a more social type of selling. You need probably someone who's a little unorthodox, like you guys are saying you enjoy being. You know, so, and then the other thing is, you know, money's part of it too. You know, do you have money to even do that? Because if you don't, then you need to become it.
Right. As a technical person, I wind up prioritizing my investment funds towards technical stuff, probably because I'm biased that way. But yeah, cool. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This has been actually way better, I think, than the centralized versus decentralized talk. I mean, tapped into it a little bit. From
that was cool. So I'll keep in touch for sure, and I look forward to seeing where you guys go with it.
Yeah, and you know of our getter, so we're there for you.
All right. Have a great night, guys.
Thanks so much.
It's great talking to you.
You too. See ya. Bye.